right, so welcome back to another episode on the El Dorado project. Now, if you've seen in the thumbnail or you saw in the description, this is for the Dakota digital gauges. Now, I did get them from Rick Rack, great company. They have a ton of stuff available for your bike, so make sure you go check them out. Now, I just finished installing the inner fairing from Hogworks, and I also installed the 12-inch Folsom Prison Series bars from Tab Performance. Great set of bars, great inner fairing. If you haven't seen those episodes, make sure you go check them out. So I already have the outer fairing off, and I've done plenty of videos on how to remove this outer fairing, so you can go check out the previous episodes on how to take this off. Now, I could have done the Dakota digital gauges when I had everything off, everything taken apart when I was doing the inner fairing, but I wanted to show you that it's very simple to access those gauges without having everything off. You can just remove this vent and remove this upper support bracket, and you can access those gauges. Very simple. So I'm going to show you what's in the box, and then we'll get it installed. All right, so here you have the MLX 8414 kit. This is for your 2014 and up Harley Davidson touring models. And in this kit, you get the oil temperature sensor, you have an O-ring, 2014 to 2016 oil temperature adapter, you get your oil temperature sensor harness, you have your interconnect harnesses, you have some cable ties, and then obviously you have your MLX display. Now, the instructions are very detailed. Obviously, I'm gonna go through the installation, but if you have any other questions, make sure you check out the instructions. I'm sure it has it listed in there. All right, so here you have your vent. You have 2 Torx screws, and they're a T25. Now, if you haven't seen this trick before, I just put a magnet on my bit. That way I don't lose my screws when I pull them out and they don't fall in there. So after you remove those 2 screws, your vent will come right out. So at first glance, it looks like you have access to your gauges, but you really don't. You have 2 Torx screws down here for the upper support bracket that are attached to this gauge cluster. And then these other screws are just below this upper support bracket where you can't really access them. So you do have to remove this upper support bracket. You have these screws, and I'll go ahead and get these out. Now, I should have mentioned this before, but if you haven't already, make sure you write down the mileage on your odometer, because you do have to enter it on the app or manually using your trigger finger switch cap. So first thing I'll do is disconnect the gauges so we can get this harness out of the way. You have these 2 Christmas tree retention clips. I'll use a plastic prying tool to pop them out. So here I'm just using a picking tool to pry up on these tabs. Just makes it a little easier to disconnect. Now that we have this harness free, we still have to pop out these other connectors. Same thing, they're held down by these little Christmas tree retention clips. So here you have your GPS. You don't need to disconnect it or remove it. All we're gonna do is just remove the support bracket screws on the top so we can slide it back some so we're able to access the screws underneath the gauges. Now I'll remove these 2 screws that are going into the gauge cluster. Same thing, T25. Now I'll remove these 2 screws on each side for the upper support bracket, and they're a 5/32 hex bit. All right, so I've gotten to this point, but sometimes things don't work out like they should. So far, I removed the vent, I removed the connectors and the harness to get it out of the way. Now, I can't stress enough how important it is not to over tighten or over torque your screws. Whoever put these back on or whenever it was installed, they torqued these screws down so much that I just can't get them out. So instead of stripping them out, I found another method that will work. So I'm gonna run you through that. You should just be able to remove these screws, and then you have 1 screw right here that you would remove. This will come off, and then you have access to your gauges. So that didn't work, but you always have to find solutions, which I did, so I'll show you that right now. So if you're having the same issue I am, all you have to do is loosen up the 3 screws on the speaker pod that are connecting it to the fairing. You just loosen them up. You don't need to remove them. You just have to back them out far enough to where you have access to those bottom screws. You have 3 screws and they're a 3/16 hex bit. Now you're gonna do the same thing for the right speaker pod. Same 3 screws. You're just gonna loosen them up. You don't have to remove them. Now we have a gap between the inner fairing and the support bracket, and you can use a T25 T-handle to reach those bottom screws. Now I'll remove the larger gauge cluster. You have 1 screw and it's a T25. Now from here, just lightly apply some pressure to your inner fairing and pull your center gauge cluster out. So the bezels stayed attached to the inner fairing. I will just leave these on. Now you have 3 screws on each gauge and they're a T25. All right, so I have all the stock gauges pulled off. You won't need this one anymore. You just want to make sure that those bezels stay attached to the inner fairing, and you will reuse the stock screw that's on the top, and you will reuse the stock screws that were on the bottom. Now for the other 2 gauges, you're going to reuse the cups, the screws, and the bezels. Now the fuel is going to go to gauge 1, and the voltage is going to go to gauge 2. Now I'll remove the bezel in order to remove the cup. As you can see, I painted these if you saw the inner fairing install. So I'm going to remove these by releasing these tabs. You have 3 tabs, and you want to be careful with these tabs because they're very fragile and they do break, because I did break one on this one. Just lightly press on those tabs to release it. And once you release the bezel, you can take this right out of the cup. So to mount gauge 1 into the cup, just line up these 2 posts with these 2 holes. Obviously you want your connector on the bottom so you can access it. Make sure it's fully seated. You want to remount your bezel. Be careful with those tabs, you don't want to break them. So it's going to be the same for gauge 2. Now, even though this one did break, the screws will apply enough pressure where it will keep it in place. Now I'll remount the left and right gauges. So as you're looking at it, gauge 2 is going to be on the left and gauge 1 is going to be on the right. So just line up your holes. Your connector will be on the bottom. Make sure your gauge is seated correctly on the other side. I'll get all the screws started and then I'll tighten them down. Now the torque value for the 2 smaller gauges is 8 to 15 inch-pounds. So for the bottom screw, I found that it's easier just to have this already in here. That way when you go to put it on, you're not trying to guide it in there and it falls down in there. So just have your screw already in there and then screw it on once you get close. Now I'll slide the center gauge cluster through here. You actually have a lot more room with this one because it is a little thinner. And then I'll get the stock screw on. Now the torque value for the larger gauge cluster is 10 to 20 inch-pounds. So if you're wondering what torque wrench I'm using the F.A.T wrench. This allows for a torque value of 10 to 65. This allows you to hit those lower torque values. I'll go ahead and reinstall these two bottom screws. Now the torque value for the upper support bracket to inner fairing screws is 10 to 19 inch-pounds. Now I'll retighten the speaker pods back to the inner fairing, and you have 3 screws on each pod. Now the torque value for the fairing speaker enclosure to the fairing screws is 48 to 60 inch-pounds. All right, so I have the new digital gauges installed. Hopefully you guys don't run into that problem where your screws are on there way too tight and you can't get them out. But either way, I found a solution where you can just either loosen up or you can take out the 3 screws on the speaker pods on the outside, and then also these 2 screws. This will drop back far enough where you can access the 2 screws on the bottom for the gauges. Now the instructions do say to remove this upper support bracket, you have a total of 11 screws. You have 2 here, 2 here. You have a total of 4 for the support bracket to the radio, and then you have 1 screw down here, and then obviously you still have to take out these 2 screws. It was a little easier just to loosen up the speaker pod screws and then take these 2 screws out for this to drop back far enough where I can access the bottom of the gauges. Now they made it really simple with these interconnect harnesses. All you have to do is plug one into here, and then it goes directly into this one. You plug one into here, and it goes directly into here. Now it doesn't matter which one you use. Just give it a slight tug to make sure it's secured. So now I'll go ahead and reconnect the one harness. This is the only harness you're gonna use, this connector here. Now what I'll do is just reinstall these Christmas tree clips back into here. Now you won't be reusing these, so you can just tuck them out of the way. So this center connector is for your oil temperature sensor. So I'll go ahead and install that now. So it'll be easier to show you straight from the instructions. From the 2014 to 2016, you have your temp sensor, and then you have your oil drain plug. And then obviously for the 2017s and up, you're just gonna replace the main drain plug. Now for the 2014 to 2016, you're gonna use that adapter ring along with the O-ring, and then you just wanna make sure that that narrow end is facing out. So for 2014 to 2016, you're gonna use this adapter ring along with the O-ring. You'll put your O-ring on first, and then you'll screw on the adapter ring. Now you just wanna make sure that the narrow end will be facing out. Then for 2017s and up, all you're gonna use is the oil temperature sensor along with the O-ring. So for 2017s and up, you're gonna replace your main drain plug. And do not unplug this one. Just make sure you have a catch pan and you already have your O-ring installed. And to take this out, it's a 5/8 socket. You just want to be quick when you do this so you don't lose too much oil. You shouldn't lose too much, but if you do, you can just fill it back up. And to tighten this down, I'm using a 3/4 inch wrench. And the torque value for the engine oil drain plug is 14 to 21 foot-pounds. So here you have your oil temp sensor connector. You're just gonna connect it here on this end, and then you're gonna route it towards the right side, so your brake side, and then you're gonna follow the frame, then through the neck, then to the connector. Just find the tab so it locks in. So you have all these wires that already lead towards the neck, so I'll just zip tie it on these wires and then follow it all the way up. All right, so here we have the oil temperature sensor wire. I have it routed up. Now it's on you how you want to route your wire, but I just routed mine along the lines and then all the way up the neck, and then here we are. So all I'm gonna do is connect it to the center connector. Make sure your tab is orientated correctly. Make sure you hear that click, and then just give it a slight tug to make sure it's secure. So now all I'm gonna do is go ahead and clean up all my wires. I'm gonna reinstall the main fuse, and then I'll run a test to make sure everything is functioning correctly. So as you can see, the odometer is reading 0. So I'll go ahead and enter this. So what I'm gonna do now is just download the app. Now you can do this manually by holding down your trigger finger switch cap, but I'm gonna go ahead and download the app and do it that way. So I'll go ahead and connect. So I'll set up. I'm gonna turn this off. So while holding down this trip button or your trigger finger switch cap, I'll hold it down. You'll see that light up. I'll turn on the bike. It'll say release. I've entered the setup. So from here, I can connect with the app. I'll go into setup, speed and tack, gauges. You can change your gauges from here. Lighting. Display. Preset odometer. So here I'm gonna go ahead and set what I had for the odometer. 1,981 miles and save. Is 1981 miles the correct mileage? Yes. So here you can go into Bluetooth, availability, always on, auto connect, you can select that. So I've never used digital gauges before, so I'm not gonna run an in-depth video on the app. Maybe when I get a little bit more accustomed with it, actually learn how to use the features, then I'll do a follow-up video on how to set this up or how I have it set up, because obviously you're gonna set it up the way you want it. But other than that, it's great that you can use the app, and it's great that you can use it manually. If you don't have an iPhone or Android, you can do it manually and then set it up that way. So you can go through all your functions manually by just clicking the trip button or your trigger finger switch cap. You can go through all your functions here, and then if you want to select something, let's say Bluetooth, I'll hold it down to set, release, and then you can see all your functions here for that. And then you would just hold down the trip button again to select that option. So I'll go ahead and go to back, and if you look at the arrow, it's pointing towards back. So I'll hold this down, and then it'll take me back to the main menu. So now I just want to exit the setup. I'll just look for exit. So now it's on exit setup. I'll hold it down. And now I'm back to my regular odometer. Now with the odometer, you want to make sure you set it before the first 100 miles. So that's pretty cool that you can do it manually, and it's cool that you can do it with the app. So great options with the Dakota digital gauges. All right guys, so here we have the Dakota digital gauges. I did purchase these off of Rick Rack. Make sure you go check them out. They have plenty of accessories for all your riding needs. Yeah, I like the way these things look. Pretty simple install, getting these in, besides the screws being stripped out and being over torqued. Now, if you do run into that issue, make sure you don't force those screws out and break those well nuts inside the speaker pods, because those well nuts are built into the speaker pods, and if you break those, you're gonna have to buy all new speaker pods, and that's just more money that you don't want to spend. So pretty cool looking gauges. I haven't ran with them too much, so I can't say too much about them as far as the features go. But yeah, I mean, there's the first 5-10 minutes playing around with it, there was a lot of cool stuff that I was able to set up on here, and you just want to make sure that you download that app, put in all your information, because if you don't do that, you're going to have some issues like check engine lights, key fob stuff. I have to fix all that. That's no big deal, pretty quick fix, but you won't have this issue. I have some other stuff going on with the bike that I need to get fixed, but other than that, guys, everything looks good on here. I like the way they work. At night they look good, during the day they look good. There's different settings you can do on them. Other than that, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and I'll see you on the next one.